Hey everyone, welcome to Voices from the Mausoleum. Steve here, and join with me today again, a good friend of the show, Squall Charlson. How you doing,
Hey,
buddy?
I'm good. How about yourself? Hey, that intro, you're in it now.
I am in it. I
It's great.
am officially a member of the channel.
Nice. I love that. That's great.
Only because the hair doesn't match anymore, so
Mhm.
we'll have to get
Adding in
some
new clips.
my natural hair. We'll have to get that in there.
Let's make it a goal of this episode to make a clip for you that's so good it'll end up in that intro. You can petition to have that one put in.
I'm in. Let's do it. I don't know. We'll see if I have anything noteworthy to do. But really exciting to have you back, right? This is really quick turnaround because you are churning these out now. Your second entry in the Terror Valley series, You're Not My Sensei, which is out now, right? It's
Yeah, the time of this recording is just came out, so I don't have a physical copy with me. I had like a proof one that I just handed off to somebody else so that they could read it. But I still have my e-copy and another box of physicals coming in. Sometime Amazon likes to push it off a few extra weeks where you could order it for the full price and it'll be here tomorrow. But if you order like 100 of them on your own, it comes in like next year. So.
Sure. I know I ordered my physical copy, but I know I opted to get a digital from you so I can just sort of make sure I was able to get through it so we could talk about it. And of course, yeah, I know we're sort of blocking the cover, but we're going to have, here, we're going to have a nice little image for you to enjoy because the covers for these really are phenomenal. And you have the same artist, right?
Yeah, Marcelo Biot, he nailed it again. Like I've been working with him since back when I had my TV show, Let's Talk Toku. He did our poster for it. So it was like me in front of like all these other iconic tokusatsu characters and really great art. He does a lot of cool stuff. He's been doing like his own comic and was really lucky that he was like, this sounds like a fun project. What did Jim Jacobus, who did like, the Goosebumps art, how did he do that? How did a lot of those, like artists of the day, like do those pulp horror novel, covers and just kind of went nuts with it. And he came up with this idea for this cover, which is really funny because my idea for the cover was different than what he came, but I love what he did with it because I'm a very big fan of the movie The Shining, 1980s The Shining. And when he gave me like a very crude drawing of like a hand going through a door, and I was like, come on, I'm in.
Yeah.
That's so cool. I have to add that into the book now. Damn it.
I love how that scene played out in the story itself.
Yeah. I'm glad we talked about it early on because trying to add that in, late in the stage would have been interesting.
Sure. I mean, did you sort of have that overall scene in mind? Not the scene, maybe the bathroom in particular, but I don't want to get into spoilers just yet, but more of like the big action moment.
I had a few different ideas, but luckily, Marcelo and I got together and talked about this early on, and he posed that idea. The one that I had in my head was there's a scene about like middle of the book where Remy looks out her window. Remy's the main character of this book, and she sees this figure in the dark staring up at her, and that was going to be my idea for the cover. And I had another idea that I can't really talk about because there's a whole thing going on with it that maybe in a future episode we can talk about. But I had another idea on top of that, and then he came up with this, and I was just like, we have to have a scene like that because back in the day, like Goosebump covers, would have scenes that did not happen in the book at all, and it drove me nuts. And I'm such a stickler for detail that like in the book, one of the main like things that the kids had were these purple headbands that once I got the art back, I changed it to red because I'm like, you know what, that sounds cooler. It looks cooler. I'll make the cover purple. How about that? So that was sort of my compromise.
I mean, the color schemes are phenomenal. It certainly, I think it feels like a sibling to School's Out for Never, but it has its own flavor. So I sort of love that consistency, and probably that's probably a benefit of having the same artists come back to do it, right? So you're
Mhm.
able to do that kind of seamlessly.
Yeah, and he was really good at like framing, because you ask an artist to make something and they're going to fill, the whole frame. But with these covers, you have to leave a lot of, top and bottom space. And it looks really awkward when you get it because there's just a bunch of like blank space, like a door. But, as soon as you throw that logo on, as soon as you put the border over it and kind of get it laid out, it just comes to life. And it's so good. I've been staring at this thing for weeks now.
Yeah, yeah, and of course I appreciate the Shining reference as well. I know you showed me, I think, a version of the her, of Remy looking out. That was sort of
Mhm.
going to be like a Halloween-esque reference.
Yeah, that it was funny that we both the cover ideas were like an iconic slasher or like horror movie. I guess The Shining's
Hmm.
not really a slasher, but like there's a good horror movie reference to those covers that I might want to continue doing something like that until I run out of references.
You should, and I think it's a way of getting young readers into horror. I mean, that's kind of the point of a lot of these stories is like introduce what horror can do for storytelling. And then kids, as they grow up, they might be like, "Oh, so this was a reference to this amazing movie. Let me check out this movie and all these other ones." Right?
Yeah,
All
borrow
right.
from the best.
Yeah. So why don't you talk about a little bit about like Remy and sort of the again without going really too spoiler heavy yet, just the focus of the book and sort of what your end game was for it.
Cool. Let me put this on first. I was
Yes,
I was gonna get a red one, but all I had was black, so I'm like, you know what, this will do. Will
absolutely.
help out. And it's so funny because I had the idea for this book before the Barbie movie came out.
Hmm.
And when I saw Ken with that purple headband on, I was like, that's exactly what I want it in my brain to look like for his Dojo Casa, whatever. But, well, again, You're Not My Sensei, book number 2 of Terror Valley. It is about this girl named Remy who has recently picked up her entire life with her father and moved hours away to another small crumbling town that her dad's there to help fix because that's what he does. He comes in, he kind of, helps the town get back on its feet, build proper resources and just sort of is the mastermind, behind that goes out and does all this. And so she's tagging along because he'd be so far away and he's going to be gone for so long. So instead of him just going off, which he's done in the past, he's picked her up and taken her with. Well, the best thing that Remy has going for herself in her life is she is into karate and she is part of this dojo back home. And having moved, she was super close to getting her last belt and she, wants to continue learning. So she goes to the local karate dojo, which is called Solar Strike Karate. And that's kind of where the story starts of things just kind of being a little bit off, a little peculiar. Like the neighbor boy, his name's Chuck. He finds out that she's into karate and gets really scared of her because there's something going on with all these students at the karate dojo. And that's kind of like the big crux of the story is what exactly is happening and how does Remy escape from that nightmare?
Yeah, I mean it's a solid, solid pitch.
Yeah.
Costume and all. It's this is so fun. Angel and I, after we both read it, I was like, man, like Squall is like upping his game with this one. It
How
is,
so? How so?
and no shade to like School's Out for Never, but like the pacing is so on point, and it's like it just sort of this chapters just kind of like roll seamlessly into each other, and you really tell this like cohesive story, with like really complex and like relatable like child characters, right?
Mhm.
I look at Remy and Chuck and like sort of the get this kind of classic like fish out of water, new kid in town looking for a place to fit in. And I think where the story goes with the dojo and fitting in and sort of finding a group or finding people to sort of get right. I think there's such a strong parallel with like the supernatural aspect of the story and Remy's character arc. And then like poor Chuck, like not, like being this like doofus kid and like really not having a place to fit in. It sort of also parallels Remy a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, it was just so on point, and we were really just like super page turner. Like,
Oh, thank you.
yeah, yeah. Was
The funny
there?
thing about School's Out for Never, and I've said this to a few people as I've been like going through it, is I wrote that one like I think it was like 2 weeks, right? It was 2 weeks around to just kind of sit down and get the whole thing out.
Mhm.
And it was a lot easier, I realized, because anytime I would get into a weird space or I'd write myself into a corner, as some would say, I could just reset the day. I could just send them right back to class, and just start over again. I didn't really have a whole lot of issue of finding what I needed to do. Whereas this one, I struggled. Like I took like a good 3 week break from it just
Mhm.
because I was so frustrated at myself that I had specific things that I wanted to have happen and then I couldn't get Remy into certain places and I couldn't, like figure out, okay, well, how would she get to the school? How would she do that? How would, and so I actually sat down and I wrote down every single beat in the story, like all my notes and everything to like reassess what I had written. And then I went through with what I had, what I still needed, what I still wanted to do. And I laid all that out and just revised it from the beginning and it came together like immediately. I was able to crank it out in like a few days after that. So that it means a lot to say that you both read it and said that there's definitely an uptick. I know she told me that there's definitely like a scare uptick in
Sure.
terms of
Yeah.
like some of the stuff that happens. And I think I mentioned it last time I was here that I want to slowly crank that dial. And the next one, like I've written out a lot of the beats that I want to do for that one.
Hmm.
It's not, it makes this one look so docile, so nothing compared to where it's gonna go that I don't even know if it's gonna still be a kid's book. I hope so, but we'll see
There's
how far it
ways.
goes.
It just depends on how graphic you get, right? Or like, there's
Like,
ways to do it in a vague way, but imply
mhm,
what's happening, right?
mhm.
But like, yeah, like I think certainly the scare is like you tap into sort of the sort of oozy, gross horror elements in this
Yeah.
one a bit more, which I fully enjoy. It's sort of it almost feels a little Evil Dead-y for kids,
Yeah.
you know.
I can see that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the chase, like the suspense factor, because you had chases going on in the first book as well. But I
It
think
all
because
culminated in a chase, right?
the last one culminated in a chase, yeah.
Mhm.
This one felt like sort of by like the second or like towards pretty much where like the shining moment happens, right?
Yeah.
That whole point really towards the end, right? It just sort of just the momentum is like in this big swing. So I think you really build that suspense very well for
Thank
that
you.
like set, that later portion of the book.
Mhm. Thank you.
Uh, yeah, and I was just happy to hear about your process. I was going to ask you anyway, and you ended up naturally going into sort of your beat sheet.
Yeah, it was weird. Like I look at the story now and there's like certain things that happen in like the middle of the book or like at the end of the book that I was having happen in like Remy's first visit to the dojo, which made sense on paper, but then like as I actually got there, it like I was like, oh, I gotta pump the brakes. I gotta figure this out. I gotta, what exactly is this gonna work or look like? And even like the title, which comes into play, obviously, hopefully, a good book has the title come into play, was like really early on in the draft.
Hmm.
And then I pushed it more towards the ending, which I think has a really nice natural fit to it. And just kind of wraps up her story and who Remy is nicely.
Yeah.
Where, I think like the big moral of this that kids and parents and teachers want to take away is that it's best not always to go with the flow or what everyone else is doing, to kind of stand on your own,
Yeah.
and fight back when you have to and push back when something doesn't feel right. And I really liked how that kind of came together in this.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, this was this. I remember an earlier title for this.
Yeah, your early copy that I sent you has the original title, which was
Yes, but I remember you even
Howdy
telling
Your
me
Sensei.
back,
Uh-huh.
early days. Maybe was the title different in the preview of the first book?
Yes, I had to change everything before it went to like final print, but
Yeah.
it was called Bow to Your Sensei.
Right.
And I told that to like three people who are like, in my everyday normal life, like coworkers, relatives, whatever. And every single one of them without fail said, "Oh, Napoleon Dynamite." It's like,
Oh.
I guess no, that not really. And so Lauren and I took a walk, and we usually take like an hour-long walk. That entire hour, we were just spitballing different titles, and we just could not come up with one until finally "You're Not My Sensei" sort of popped up, and I'm like, no, that's kind of got a good ring to it. I like it a little
Yeah.
bit better than "Bow to Your Sensei," which
Well, it's also being said by different perspectives, right? Like,
Mhm,
if you're really talking about like standing your ground and really sort of, making your own decisions, right? Like, bow to your sensei is very much a command, where
mhm,
like you're not my sensei is like a rebuttal.
mhm,
So I think it just makes a lot more sense for the character here, considering what she's fighting up against.
mhm. And if I ever write sequels, like I know we talked about this on the last time I was here, I think culminating like another "You're Not My Sensei 2, You're Not My Sensei 3, and then like maybe even like the last one can be like "You'll Never Be My Sensei." It just has like a fun like, carrying on to it rather than "Never Bow to Your Sensei." I don't know.
I like it. I like it. I know your last sensei or
Mhm.
There's like a lot. There's a lot of fun you could have with that.
Yeah.
Is this the one you would want to sort of spin off of, sort of your living dummy, so to speak?
I wouldn't go that far. I would maybe call akin this more to like a haunted mask or a monster blood,
Okay.
but I definitely have an idea for a sequel that would involve a main character of this book that is not Remy.
Ooh.
So
Okay.
I have a good idea for it, and I set up a lot of stuff in this book, kind of like how in the last one I had a few things that I could, if I ever want to harken back to it. This one I definitely set up a few things that on the surface, whatever, but then when you get to that second one, you're gonna be like,
Oh.
it's gonna hopefully make you go back and
Yeah.
slap
After our
yourself.
recording, I'll ask you some
Okay,
spoiler
yeah.
questions on what that could be, because I have an idea. But what were well, I mean, I know you sort of fell into maybe what were some maybe the challenges of writing this. I mean, were there any other challenges, or I also sort of want to know like what did you love about writing this particular one?
I really like the characters of this one, like, and it's hard to say because I wrote this in such close proximity to the last one, and I want to have the third one out by February of next year. Want to kind of do like a 2 month thing to kind of get started. I just really, really liked every single character, and I had written down a few, when I preliminarily went through all the beats that I kind of wanted this story to take.
Yeah.
And for instance, like Principal Cope is named after a coworker of mine who she's really fun, she's really lovely, and I had no idea that that character was a thing until I got to this moment in the story and just kind of was writing, like it kind of just takes you away a little bit. And
Yeah.
she popped out of nowhere, and I was like, oh, I love her. This is great. And I could do this, and this with her. Like it like solved a huge problem that I was having with how do I get characters in certain situations because
Yeah.
you want to make it feel like it's natural, right? You want to make it feel like they're not being guided. It's not like people would equate it to like very linear, where it's just the one path. You want to make it kind of feel like they're going on their own, and things are secretly guiding them along. And that's kind of like the hand of the person writing it. And so coming up with like Principal Cope, I was like, oh, this is great. I can have her do this, and this, you know. Same with like her dad. Like I kept coming back and like revising her dad here and there, just little tweaks of like, how can I make him like something that you would expect out of these books, but then also kind of turn it into a little differently.
Hmm.
Um, but honestly, like the only challenge of this was just I was getting close to my 2 month cutoff time, and I was just so frustrated that I had like written so much of this that I was like, I'm probably going to have to like restart. And that really took a lot of like owning up to it, and like, okay, how do I fix this? Instead of throwing it out, what can I take from it? And I was very scared of how much I was going to have to cut out. But I think by the end of it, I cut out like 1 or 2 chapters worth of stuff. And the rest I was able to refix and format. And I just literally would slap it into a new chapter and then had it all in red and was just like, rework this. And I went through and I would make it fit, like where it happened in the story or who the characters might be in it. And that helped out a lot.
Yeah. I mean, considering how much normally gets cut from projects, right? Like
Mhm.
that's not too bad actually, right?
Yeah, like the revisement on the first book, I went from like 27,000 words and I cut out about like 2,000 of it by the time I got to the end, which sounds pretty normal. I'm like, don't
Yeah.
really need this. Oh, I did this kind of later, redundant. This one, I went from about 24,000 almost to 30,000 words. And there was just so much like, I could add this in. Oh, I could have fun with this. And it was just kind of cool that I didn't really want it to stop because I just had so many fun ideas. And I think that's kind of what led into me thinking and talking about, well, where does it go from here? Like what
Right.
could be the next possible step for it?
Well, I think it really shines through that you had so much fun writing it because I think it really you can there's an energy to this one
Mhm.
that you could tell that you were really sort of there's a lot of oomph there, right? There was
Yeah.
excitement.
Yeah. Not that there's not excitement in the first one. That one was kind of like, baby's first book. But I was
No,
like,
I again to reiterate, I am not crapping on the first
uh-huh.
book.
No, my editor, my wife Lauren, she said the same thing. Like she really likes a lot of the changes that this one has. Like the first one feels almost like I had to do that in order to get to this, that I
Yeah.
couldn't really start on this type of a book because then it would be too expected of everything to be like this, where I kind of want to do different things. Like the first book, I wanted it very science fiction-y horror.
Yeah.
This one, I wanted it very like action horror. And so in the third one, I'm going to make it like very like slashery, like horror as you would expect,
Yeah.
to kind of like wiggle into each of these little genres and see where I go from there.
Ooh. All right. I love it. Yeah, because the next one, I think the preview is in the book, or at least the title from what
Yes.
I read.
Yes. It's book number 3 for Terror Valley is going to be called This Way to Camp Blood.
So I don't know if this is necessarily a spoiler, and you could stop me. There is a moment in this book that references that. Now, what is there an in-universe explanation?
There is. I actually cut out another mention of this. So in Terror Valley universe, there is a movie series called Camp Blood, and there are several titles of these, schlocky horror films. The first sentence of School's Out for Never, the first book, was, I watched a back-to-back horror movie marathon last night, so it was no wonder I was asleep in class the next day. That was going to be Camp Blood, but I rephrased that because I didn't want the first sentence out of the book to be, oh, he's just referencing Friday the 13th. Oh, I didn't want anybody to like make any sort of parallel to that. I wanted it to stand on its own.
Sure.
But that line was in direct reference to what Remy also watches and then what the third book is going to be about, which we can talk about later.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm very curious with that like the movie within a series with what's that, we're getting into the series. I'm so into it. You have piqued my interest. But
it's gonna be a fun one.
So what I love about, because you mentioned it, Principal Cope is based on a coworker of yours.
Yeah.
And I know Lauren got a reference in the first book.
Mm-hmm.
Were there any other references in this one that I may not have picked up on?
No, I really like the name Remy, and that just kind of was like a natural name to me. I've never really known anyone named Remy. Chuck was, I had somebody else ask me if Chuck was in relation to like Chuck Norris, which had never crossed my mind until he said that or asked that. But no, Chuck was very loosely based off of the idea of somebody I knew when I was younger, who was kind of, blah, 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 any chance you would give him. He's very not athletically gifted. Right. And there was a lot of liberties obviously taken with Chuck, but that was kind of like the main sort of idea, was he was the, the basis for that. Everybody else just kind of, popped into it. I think Chuck and Miss Cope are the only two in this, and I could be wrong. I'm trying to think through everything real quick, but
Did you happen to have a crappy assistant principal with like a god complex? Is that where he came from?
yes and no, except mine was built like Dwayne the Rock Johnson. He like looked like a minotaur. Like he was nuts. He was bald. He was crazy. He chased me down the hall one time, and it was the most terrifying moment of my life. But nothing like Mr. Flum. Mr. Flum's just kind of like an amalgamation of like terrible faculty, which I think we've all, experienced in our school days. And if not, you're very lucky, and I hate you.
Speaking of like just the adults in your series in general, I like that you sort of have a nice balance in this one in particular of like a big trope. And Angel sort of sometimes makes fun of the trope a lot of times in other horror is like the adults that don't believe the kids.
Yeah.
And I like that you have sort of like a 50-50, right? You sort of have this nice balance of like, the adult that's sort of trying to stay in reality. But then you have the ones that you can sort of from the get-go kind of get the vibe that they have Remy's back here.
Yeah, I definitely took that into mind when I was writing this because, yeah, like a lot of those types of books, like horror movies in general, nobody believes the kids. And I think like the first thing that really broke that was Stranger Things, where you had adult characters kind of come into the fray eventually, and sort of experience it with them. And just like the character chemistry of season 2 onward in that show is really, really good. And I think it's because of the inclusion of the adults that you can tell sort of mixed stories between what it's like to be a child, what it's like to be an adult, and how they understand each other and are able to work together.
Yeah.
And I think with the first one, you get a lot of that adult, camaraderie with the main character, Freddy, only to find out, that's not exactly what, he's kind of been led on. He's kind of been used to an extent. And the other adults do what adults normally do and just kind of like let kids figure it out themselves. Because I mean, that's like the biggest learning thing is to just kind of sit back and let them. Because if you tell them, like, hey, like, don't do this, I did this, they're going to do it anyway. They're going to do it 10 times as much. But what I really liked about this one was I was able to have a character that very much had to stand on her own. Like that was like the main core principle.
Yeah.
New town, no friends. And the friends that she does have kind of get taken away. It kind of unravels that way. And like her dad's very 50-50, right? Like he's kind of off in his own world, right?
Yeah.
He very much plays that stereotype. But then you have like lovely people like Principal Cope. You have like her Sensei Roberts, who's just over the phone. She's still able to, offer her support and stuff like that. And I thought the balance worked out really nice in this, to where it's not too adult lenient. Like they're not going to come in and save the day. Like it's still up to the kids' characters.
No, and there's like a specific moment where an adult character sort of puts it on Remy to make her own decision and fix the problem.
Right. Towards the third act, yeah.
That I really appreciate. I hope that's not too spoilery. I tried to be as vague as possible. Okay. Oh, did you take karate as a kid?
I did not. I wanted to, but here's the thing. My mom vetoed it hard because I got into fights on a regular occasion. She didn't want me to know how to actively kick someone's ass. Which
all that Power Ranger Squall. That's why you get into fights.
Well, can I tell a funny story?
Sure.
I was in kindergarten and we had a new student who had been held back a year or two. I don't know. He was like a foot or two taller than every other kid in that class. And my mom took one look at him. This is like one of the very few cool stories I can say about her. But she said one look at him. And the way she tells the story, she said, I knew that kid was going to beat you up. And sure enough, a week later, she gets called to the school and I've been in an altercation. She comes to the office. I'm sitting there, the new giant kid sitting there, and 3 other kids are also sitting there with ice packs. And she's like, okay. And so she goes in and she starts talking to the principal, and on the playground, some other kids were making fun of him because he was bigger, he was a little slower, and I stood up for him. And together, the 2 of us teamed up and beat the crap out of these other kids. And so I love that story because I would absolutely still do that today.
Yeah, you're like a vigilante. I love it.
yeah, she would not pay for me to go and learn how to fight.
Oh. So was this maybe was this a little bit of you vicariously living through your characters?
Yeah, I feel a little bit closer to Chuck in that regard, where I want to do it, but have never really had the chance. And then you
Yeah.
kind of get to an age where you're like too old. Like I wanted to do it. Honestly, like this whole story came about from Lauren and I watching Cobra Kai.
Mm.
And I was like, what does a scary karate story look like? And that's kind of the basis for this. And I was like, I want to kind of get into that. Because I did like a parkour gym and like learned how to like parkour, but I was like the oldest guy there. Like it's all kids rolling and tumbling and shit. And I'm like trying to, like they're like, run up this wall, and every kid's failing, and it's like only a foot taller than me. I'm like, easy. But that's how I felt like with karate when I started looking into it again. I was like, yeah, I'd be like the only adult. Like, have you seen Cobra Kai? They have.
No, it's actually a show that I've been meaning to watch.
You have to watch. It's so good. We finished it and we rewatched it again. There's a character who's an adult. His name's Stingray, and he's like in the classes with all the kids. And Lauren's like, you can't go and do this. You'll be
They
the
have adult
Stingray.
classes, like adult only classes.
Not as many as you'd want here. It seems like they all kind of intermingle. So like, it might not be the only adult, but there definitely would also be kids there, and I don't want to.
Maybe it's maybe there's more options in New York. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, probably.
Well, I also looked into other forms, right? There's other. Oh my gosh, I forgot what I was looking. It was because it's not really fighting. It's mostly like learning how to fall and move.
Yeah.
What's it called? I'm like totally blanking.
I know what you're talking about. Can I show you a funny picture? There's this really creepy. I use creepy lightly because I actually want to go on and talk to this person. He looks really cool. But at night, it looks directly out of my book. We were getting drinks one night, and I look over and I see this.
Oh,
it's just
like
it's
makeshift looking sign.
Yeah, it's so old. It's so eclectic, and it's creepy. And I'm like, that's exactly what it looks like in my book, and it exists here in Kansas City, which is crazy.
That's wild. I mean, the vibe of the city as well. I mean, what inspired sort of it being a rundown environment? Like, sort of was the idea of like the dad being sort of like this kind of urban development, sort of revitalization kind of person? Where'd that come from?
Well, we can get into this a little bit in spoilers, but I had a different ending for this book, which kind of influenced a lot of that moving into it. But as I went back and revised and changed the ending to what I have now, I still kind of liked this idea of this city on the verge of just kind of crumbling and blowing away into the dust, and just nobody there really paying attention. Like there's a scene with this like highway, like this like really like busy road, right? And they're literally almost trying to run over the kids because like that's how much like they just are so out of it. Like the whole town's in this like funk. I kind of felt like as I was writing it, and everybody's kind of given up. And whether or not they want to point to like this dojo being behind it, or if there's some like bigger problem maybe with the city that we haven't gotten to yet, it just like a whole kind of defeated place. Which I don't know if you've ever been to any of those like small little towns that you drive through when you're on a road trip, but there's just not a lot going on there. They got like a bar, they got like this. I kind of wanted like a bigger version of that, but like think of like a Detroit or something where we've just kind of let it fall into disarray, and it's just kept going and going. And what would that look like to a kid, that has moved from a nicer suburban, city to this?
I mean, it adds to that feeling that Remy's going through, right? Of just like, where am I? I don't feel like I belong here. What's this all about? Like, it just adds to that overall confusion. I think you nailed that perfectly.
Oh, thank you.
But yeah, it's why you talk about sort of these rundown. There was one in particular that my husband and I always talk about. We were driving around Florida of all places.
I'm sorry.
And there's this place called Yeehaw Junction, Florida.
I gotta go there. That sounds
cool. Oh boy. And I no shade to anyone watching who might be from Yeehaw Junction, Florida.
Leave a comment down below if you're from Yeehaw.
Yes, let us know what it's like to live in Yeehaw. Because a quick drive-through was scary.
I mean, you could say the same thing about Miami. Like, there are some parts of Miami that look like they're gonna fall off into the ocean. Like,
Yeah.
and I think that like also speaks to like a bigger narrative of how we view infrastructure here, how we kind
Sure.
of, you like Detroit, for instance, was like huge with car manufacturing. And once all those like plants shut down, the whole thing just kind of went belly up. If you weren't
Yeah.
downtown, there's not a whole lot there. And the appeal of living up in Michigan out in the middle of nowhere doesn't really, strike you when you could move to
Yeah.
like Illinois or Ohio or something nearby.
That's such a deeper conversation, right? That I think, all right, a middle school reading this might not pick up on, but you're right. I mean, there's a lot to be said there. It's like, a lot of these cities, yeah, their main source of income were like these big factories, right? And like, of
Mhm.
course, whatever, I always think of like power plants or like, non-renewable resources, right? A lot of these things kind of go by the wayside, but we got to find things to, come in its place and help communities
Right.
out. And it's a real issue.
Mhm. And I
You
mean,
know?
like, if any kids reading this in Kansas City, they'll probably be able to point out a bunch because, like, our roads and stuff here are awful. I don't know what they're doing here, but like, they'll patch up a road that'll just like break open again in 2 months. Like, I think it's like a huge like scam or something where they're just like mixing all this material. I'm like, yep, we're fixing it. 2 months, we'll be back.
Uh,
So maybe that's just kind of like my own personal viewpoint of
maybe, well, maybe
going.
you'll inspire some future, Remy's dads. I forgot his name for a second, but
Yeah, Scott. Yeah.
Scott. You'll inspire some future Scots who want to come in and help communities.
Yeah. His job originally was more akin to what I actually do in my day job, which is working for a nonprofit that helps children going through the foster care system or the kinship care, and the families that support and service them.
Yeah.
We offer things like that, and we are opening up different branches all over the time. But we have people that go out to like do like house visits or city visits to just kind of assess what they need. That's originally what his job started out as, and then I kind
Yeah.
of moved it more towards like infrastructure and more resources for the locations he's working with.
Well, I mean, it's all beautiful work, all
Yeah.
like super important. The social worker in me approves and
Yeah.
appreciates that. So before we sort of wrap up and head into sort of our spoilers section of the conversation, was just anything that you wanted to add with, you're not my sensei?
No, I love how this one turned out, and I feel like if you've been on the fence, if you're watching this, if you've been on the fence about reading the first one, I get it. First one, it might not be for you. I think that this one hits everybody that I've put it in the hands of has had only nice things to say about it and really love the characters that came out of it that I'm surprised with and very happy of the whole thing. And it's got some good scares in it. Like even writing it, like I would like tell Lauren about these ideas that I would have, and she was just like, ugh. And then I would write it and I'd come back and she would like even like the ick would amplify.
Yeah.
So it was just really fun. And then now working kind of towards the next one, giving her a few ideas that I have and just seeing her immediate reaction. I'm like, yeah, I'm going there. That's gonna be cool, right?
Mhm. Anything that you can reveal about Camp Blood?
So this way to Camp Blood. So the next one, the third one, is going to be about this boy. And I don't know how full tilt I want to go into like this, but he wins a walk-on role to his favorite film franchise series, which is the Camp Blood series. And his dream is to be killed and immortalized on screen in a death. And things aren't maybe what they seem.
Feels
And
very meta. Feels like
yes.
feels very Scream in a way, but like
Mm-hmm.
refreshingly so, because it's a different spin on this movie within a story kind of thing.
Mhm. And I don't know
Um
how many, like, other people I want to, like, win it, like, a kinda like Charlie and the Chocolate
yeah.
Factory thing, or maybe if
Ooh.
it's just him. I'm still kinda, like, up in the air, so who
Who's
knows?
got the blood red ticket, you know?
Right. But I just had this great idea, and I have a fun twist to it, and that's what I thought the book was, and then I sat down a couple nights ago, and I, like,
Mhm.
really was like, "But how does it end?" I was like, "Oh, sh." Took me, like, 20 minutes, and then I eureka, I had it. And I was like, that's it. That's the story. And so it's just so funny because like writing this one, I had just finished the first one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I went through all the story beats of this one because I was like, okay, I have an idea about this character, karate, bad sensei. It would end in a fight, obviously. And then I went through and I did the beats and I realized I had the whole story. I was like, oh whoa. Same thing just happened with this last one, which I love. Oh, it's gonna be such a fun one to write. I'm excited to get into it here soon.
Oh, I love it. So, I mean, I know you said, people might not be super on board for the first book, but I would say you could read these out of order, right? So maybe you could easily start with You're Not My Sensei, and then if you so were curious, check it, because people should still read the first one. I love the timey-wimey madness of it. I think the characters are phenomenal. The both the kids and the adults, the situations are great. The meaning behind it is wonderful. I think that was something that Angel and I really gravitated towards, was the message of the first one. And I think that sort of kind of goes to your writer's voice, is like you have a message there too. And I think that's super important, especially if you're writing for a younger audience, right? It's like you want to have something that they can relate to.
Right. Something that they can take away from it. I think parents and teachers also appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I'm very lucky that my mother-in-law is a retired fourth grade teacher. And so she's even talking about, because she's reading these now too, about doing like lesson plans and stuff around it. And like incorporating that, since I'll tell you at the end of this, but like I'm doing something this holiday season to try to like get the books out into more hands and kind of put it out there, at least here first in Kansas City, and then kind of spreading it from there.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. I think more people reading Terror Valley is a good thing.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Well, with that being said, right? So where can people find you? People find Terror Valley, You're Not My Sensei, and the rest of the novels?
You can always find us over at terrorvalley.com. We have updates to everything there. You can find all the book links. You can find all the descriptions. You might even find lesson plans there soon for teachers and parents. You can find me over at Twitter at Squall Charlson, or you can follow us at Terror Valley Books, which is BKS on Twitter as well, where we update it, frequently with what's going on. We share all the fun stuff that we see for the books and everybody that's reading them. And yeah, not a whole lot of places just yet, but maybe by the third book, who knows?
Absolutely. Hey, they spread like the dojos, right? We'll say.
Yeah.
So again, thank you so much, Squall. This has been a blast.
Yeah, I love coming on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you for everyone watching Voices from the Mausoleum. Be sure to check out the show in a week from now. We will be publishing the spoiler talk for You're Not My Sensei.
You've got 7 days to read this starting now.
There's your homework. No guaranteed lesson plan, but that's your homework. Read the book.
Yeah.
Did you do the reading? Okay. Take care now.